Howdy everyone. The last video I uploaded is on the idea of transmedicalism, and while I think it does definitely stand alone, I kind of want to make this video as almost an add-on to the discussion, where I talk about things I didn't talk about in that video. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out and then come back. First link in the description. But as a result of that, this is going to be a bit of a rougher video, less meticulously scripted and just me spitballing and talking about things in general. There are some things that I was going back and forth on including in this video, that I ended up not talking about because I didn't want to crash my video editing software again, but I think should be brought up, or are also interesting jumping off points. I might make more of these footnotes videos. If you want to see that, please leave a like and comment to let me know you want more of these. But anyway, I feel like there's a lot to talk about in regards to transmedicalism and Riley Grace Rochon. Something I didn't bring up too much, but is important to acknowledge, is how Calvin Garrett's whole internet presence for years was just bullying people that he was trying to gatekeep out of the community because they didn't fit the gender binary in the way he wanted them to, or because they didn't suffer from dysphoria in the same way as he did. But the same sort of thing is present when Riley was talking as well, like here in this clip.
Like there's something that motivates us so that it's more than just a choice.
Where she talks about some essence of being trans that is more than just a choice, and bases most of her foundation on this fact. And this is the closest I'll ever come to being an actual woke scold, but the way that she words it here implies almost that if transness was just a choice, then things would start to fall apart in the worldview that Riley is constructing. It creates some sort of unnecessary reliance upon the choice element, or lack thereof, of transness. So I'll get to it. Is being trans a choice? Well, even if you just mean identifying with a different gender to the one you were assigned at birth, then at first glance, the obvious answer you have to give is no. Because A, being gay definitely isn't a choice. That debate was settled years ago. And being trans is also part of the LGBT community. B, I certainly didn't choose to not be cis. That realization just came to me one day in the office of a job I hated. And C, if you say it is, then that just legitimizes the I identify as an attack helicopter joke as valid criticisms of your identity. And while saying C is no different to actually making I identify as an attack helicopter jokes, since that meta-commentary is exactly what the point of those attack helicopter jokes are, it turns out that digging deeper, the answer to that question of is being trans a choice is actually... because let's dig into a hypothetical. If you assume that being trans, aka identifying as a different gender to the one you were assigned at birth, can never be a choice, then let's imagine a hypothetical person. They experience some form of occasional gender incongruence and feel like they might be non-binary, but it's only mild incongruence, to the point where they barely even noticed it, and it wouldn't have even crossed their minds if they didn't have a bunch of trans and non-binary friends, and they probably could have just coped with presenting as cis for the rest of their lives. And they know that if they out themselves, they understand that if they go through with that, the conversations and potentially harassment that they'd have to go through would be incredibly annoying. Therefore, that person has a choice. They can either choose to go through this level of identifying as non-binary and therefore trans, or they can go through and live the cis life, one that's more privileged, but one that's not representative of this gender incongruence that they suffer. The question is, if they come to this crossroads and make a final decision one way or the other, does their transness depend on that decision? Because logically you'd have to answer no. But if not, then what does it depend upon? That gender incongruence? Because does this gender incongruence require you to be aware of it? Because on the one hand, someone can be extremely unaware of the ways they're suffering under things like anxiety or ADHD and only realize in retrospect. I definitely didn't realize I had both of those until I was about 17, 18. But on the other hand, if it doesn't noticeably affect you, then how can something like gender incongruence even be diagnosed? These are questions in which a search for a coherent answer is essentially fruitless. And to be clear, that hypothetical example, word for word, is me. I made a choice to identify as trans, but I very easily could have not made that choice if I was raised in a different environment, or if I had different friends. I identified as cis for most of my life, and I was fine doing that. I could probably go back and be cis for the rest of my life, and I'd be somewhat okay with that. I'm just not going to, because being non-binary makes more sense to me. Is this a choice that I'm making, or not? And honestly, who cares? This is my experience, and only I get to take it with me. Another key tenet of transmedicalism is gatekeeping, which is something I wanted to mention, but at the same time it was something which I felt was implied well enough in the video without it being directly brought up. That being said, it's important to mention that since transmedicalism is based upon being able to medically or legally diagnose transness, there's always an implication of real trans people like us, and not necessarily trenders, but definitely people who aren't really trans. This is something that's evident in what Riley says, when she tries to imply that transness is more than just a choice. And it's impossible to make this argument in a way that doesn't come at the expense of, or at least downplay the experience of, people who would, quote, choose to be trans. And I could talk about the implications that this has on people who are commonly considered to be, quote, trenders, and how they were always people who chose to identify as trans because it's cool and quirky or whatever. But at the same time, I don't want to assert that that's what Riley is doing here. I just strongly disagree with the notion being pushed forward, inadvertently as it may be, that if transness could ever be a choice, then it wouldn't be as valid. Also, a lot of the criticisms that Riley gives for the idea of earnest self-identification boils down to the infinite regress argument. The argument that if the definition of a word uses the word in it, then it's a flawed argument. And I could show you words whose definition uses the same word in it, notably the very first word in the dictionary, but that's a bit of a cheap, bad faith argument that I just thought would be funny. Let's walk through Riley's argument. She implies that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman is a bad definition, since it could be brought into an infinite regress, since you could replace a woman with someone who identifies as a woman in the definition an infinite number of times. So a woman is someone who identifies as someone who identifies as a woman, and that apparently makes the definition useless. But what Riley fails to grasp is, that's the point. The only thing in common with, quote, womanhood, if you take in the totality of the experiences of every woman, the only commonality is the fact that they all identify as women. And most people who use the "a woman is someone who identifies as such" argument knows that. The infinite regress part isn't the fault of people who use the definition. It's a problem with the category of womanhood itself. Anyway, that's the main couple of things I had to say about this. There are also a couple of comments on my last video about how total depathologization of trans experiences might limit the availability of trans-affirming surgery being covered by insurance. And I get that. Some parts of trans experience in the current day being covered by medical insurance, like surgery, is a good thing and should stay being a thing. That being said, however, I think that that's very possible even within a totally depathologized trans experience, and is also something worth fighting for. And obviously, trans depathologization won't happen overnight, so there's time to work out the nuances and details of what that would entail specifically. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. If you like it, please be sure to like, comment to let me know you like the video, and subscribe for more like it. Also, follow my socials on screen and link in the description for cool posts such as this one. And as always, stay safe, stay spicy, and have a good